Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mojito Movement. And today I'm joined by an absolute legend in the fitness space, Mr. Dan Osman, and I will get you to introduce yourself very shortly. But it's customary that we cheers the mojito, so I've gone all out. I've got a skull glass and everything today, so we're going all in. So cheers to that one.
Cheers. I've gone for the lemon and lime sparkling water at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm fully committed to this podcast now.
Authenticity and all that.
Absolutely. Well, it was this is the format that created it in IFS. It was day drinking.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to recapture that moment. So just like IFS, I'm going to listen to you talk absolute knowledge bombs whilst sipping a mojito. So before we get into it, introduce yourself to everybody listening. Let them know who you are and where they can find you.
Okay, the short version. So I've roughly been in the health and fitness industry for it'll be 20 years. It actually come May. Started off as a general health level 2 coach, wiping sort of machines, doing gym intros, showing people how to do bench press, squat, etc. That kind of evolved into strength and conditioning. A vested interest in that at university. Went on to become an S&C coach. Did an internship with Surrey's Rugby Club. Realised there were huge gaps in my knowledge in terms of nutrition. Went on did a postgrad in performance nutrition. I've worked with TAS athletes, which is, for those unaware, talented athlete scholarship scheme. So essentially, athletes at university that get a little bit of extra funding to help them pursue their sports or their sports specialisms. And that kind of evolved into a little bit my own thing. I relocated back to Essex a few years after I graduated at uni, did my internship and did my thing there, and got a job in a school to essentially prove I could pay a mortgage because I was buying a house at the time, and built up the additional side bits. And I describe myself now as more like a health mongrel. So I still do a lot of coaching, but it's more on the deeper levels, I guess. So all encompassing health, nutrition, sleep hygiene. I do some education bits going into business organizations and talking about well-being. I do some performance nutrition stuff with some athletes. I do general psychological based mindset work with people as well. It's a real mixed bag. I do a little bit of copywriting, do a bit of podcasting. I wouldn't be able to define what I do, but I love the diversity of it anyway. And that is the most short version, believe it or not.
They're happy days, mate, and there's lots that we're going to dig into in this episode, that's for sure. So we will revisit most of that. And for those that don't currently follow you, that think this guy sounds interesting and worth a follow, where can they find you on the socials?
Well, I implore you to leave that to the end because I might be very boring. Don't go and follow me on the basis of an intro. But at the.dan.osman on Instagram is where I put most stuff out. LinkedIn, I don't use Facebook or anything like that. I've got a mailing list, which you can find all links on my Instagram. And I've also got my own podcast, Dan Osman's Ramblings of a Madman, which does exactly what it says on the tin. Although I possibly should change it at some point because I do get far more educated people than me on there not talking nonsense.
Yeah, very similar to this podcast here, where most of the people that are on are far more knowledgeable than I can ever be, and I just use it as an opportunity to day drink. So it's all fun and games. So let's go straight back to the start. So I obviously became far more aware of you, obviously, from IFS and the talk that you did at IFS, which I definitely want to dig into in a bit more detail. But take me back through your own personal journey from a fitness perspective, because you've done the physique competition side of things and what have you. So how did your sort of journey into fitness start, and how did that look? And how did you get to where you are, I guess, is the question.
I guess it wasn't really a conventional entry into the fitness industry, in that I wasn't a naturally sporty kid. I enjoyed sports, I enjoyed watching them, I enjoyed playing them, but I was also a child in a much larger body, so that came with some ridicule, some bullying, and despite, I guess, wanting to participate, it was always, back then in the 90s, early noughties, the prospect of actually getting the piss taken out of you was the one thing that put me off. So I was always the kid that had a note not to do PE, to be quite honest. So although I enjoyed those kind of things, and that were the days where you would do skins versus shirts, and you'd have to have a shower, and it was mixed swimming, and I was very hyper conscious of my body shape and the impact on the world and kind of response it elicited. And yeah, I guess I don't know, shame perhaps is a too strong a word, but there probably was some deeper rooted stuff there that prevented me in participating. And what I saw as a great source of comfort was food. back then. I didn't necessarily, without getting the violins out, have the easiest childhood. And I lent on what was my psychological safety tools, which was food, retreating, generally being a bit of a chameleon and trying to fit in as many groups as possible as like an adaptive survival thing, and a maladaptive thing, which was that leaning on food again. So any kind of uncomfortable thoughts, feelings about myself, questions about my self-worth, self-esteem, there was great comfort in food. Shift forward a few years, I guess when I went to college, kind of got into a circle which I really recognised wasn't conducive to the sort of life I wanted to lead. I wanted to be a healthier individual. I wanted to value myself a little bit higher. Got into general mischief, I guess, that all teenagers do, smoking a bit of weed, hanging around with the wrong crowds, and ostracised myself from everyone at the drop of a hat almost. Decided I wanted to invest in my health and physical activity, got involved in martial arts, going to the gym. And essentially, like most people, my interest came from training the shape of my body, and that leading on to feelings of bettering myself, bettering my self-worth, and all those kind of things. And when I decided I wanted to go to university, I took a year out and worked in a bank, essentially just because I wanted to be able to survive financially.
Yeah.
I went on and did sports studies, and that's kind of, I guess, where things took over. There was a heavily subsidised level 2 at that time, then level 3 health and fitness instructor award, and then PT award. And I worked PT hours to survive whilst I did my university studies, and it kind of escalated from there. So with my interest in martial arts, strength and conditioning being a foundational part of that, is I was always partnered with people that were much physically stronger, fitter than I was. So kind of saw a gap there. So although it was my initial impetus to get into health and fitness was to change my body shape, it was then became a little bit more performance based. And then when I stepped into, I guess, the conventional route of health and fitness, it was everyone's got their kit off. Why have they all got their kit off? And why is this such a unique selling point? And why are these people positioned as authorities? Although they weren't distinct questions I was asking myself at the time, it was a little bit of monkey see, monkey do.
Yeah.
The people that was positioned as the most authoritative, they had to follow a certain rite of passage, and that led me a little bit more into physique sport, and that aligned with the S&C work that I was doing, you know, filling gaps in my knowledge in terms of performance nutrition and the whole world around that, where, you know, your body is your business card, and that is how you pick up business, and essentially focus on body transformations. In time, I work with physique athletes to national and international standard, and recognize the kind of the pendulum swing went the other way a little bit. And a core value of mine going into the pursuit of my own personal health and fitness journey, as well as working with others, was health being a foundational part of that. And although that's hugely subjective, what I recognised is delving into the deepest, darkest depths of body composition and aesthetic sport is some of those things that accompany that are inherently unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I was very torn conscious-wise, although the people were, I guess, subjectively, in air quotations, in their best physical shape, possibly physically and mentally, they weren't there. And that didn't necessarily carry on or carry out. And I made a distinct focus on bettering people's physical health and their psychological health, and taking them on this journey where they can reflect on their body image, their relationship with food, and whether the practices and behaviors were all encompassing and lending themselves to a better version of themselves for the foreseeable, not just the short term, not just the 8, 10, 12-week body transformations. And that has been a little bit more arduous, because I don't think a lot of people recognize that until they've made a few of these mistakes, much as the same as I did personally and professionally. And now I guess my focal point is just those people that have been on perpetual dieting journeys and focused on the things that I did 20 years ago, and making all the mistakes that I did, hopefully bypassing some of that and facilitating their journey a little bit more, so it can lend itself to leading a fuller, happier life, rather than one that is solely based around just body shape and, you know, letting that be the defining factor of my self-worth, and how that lends itself to being successful in this life, and actually helping people define what that version of success looks like to them.
Yeah, and I think it's so important because, yeah, and there's a lot to dig into there that you said, but the fitness space is very, or certainly traditionally has been very superficial. It's very much authority is based on aesthetics rather than knowledge, and you still see it on social media now, and it's almost branching off into two directions where authority is based on either aesthetics or follower count, and still knowledge is like the least valuable commodity in the fitness space, which is kind of crazy, but you do see it. I was exactly the same with my own journey. I always had massive issues with my own body image and how I looked, and ended up foraging a path of physique competition because I kind of felt like it was what you needed to do. I wanted to look better, or I thought I would be happier if I was, had that perfect V taper and had abs and could step on stage and get judged by people who have done something similar. And you kind of fall into it. And my initial thoughts around coaching, and I've spoken about it on previous episodes, was that I was going to compete, I was going to qualify whilst doing my first couple of shows, and then I was going to help other people compete, because I genuinely thought that's what being a PT was. And it was only when I started doing my qualifications, you start to realize that a lot of the information out there is not very accurate. I did a 10-month prep from 2019 into 2020, and my show got cancelled because of COVID. And it was only when I went into lockdown and I was suddenly like back to being in full control of what I was eating, and I wasn't able to train twice a day every day, that I suddenly started to realize that these behaviors that had pretty much become my personality, like they became everything about me, were probably not the healthiest behavior traits to have. And you just don't see it from the outside. If you're scrolling Instagram and you see people on stage and they're smiling, and you see their post-show photos where they're posing with a donut, and you see all this stuff and you kind of go, oh, it looks fantastic, it looks really good. But what you don't realize until you lift the hood is how damaging the behaviors that are required to get to that place actually can be, because it's not a health centric environment. It's very much an aesthetic centric environment, and much like we see the general fat loss space is quite often a weight centric environment, the behaviors required to elicit certain responses quite often come at the expense of the individual pursuing it. Which is why when I sat and listened to your talk at IFS around the fact that your body doesn't need to be your business card, and that actually that approach can be potentially damaging for the individual. I found myself sitting there going, fucking finally, like somebody gets it, because in my head I'd become completely almost disillusioned with the fitness industry, because I felt like people respected me more when I was prepping because I was really lean, but I was a horrible person to be around, because if I missed a meal, I was an aggy cunt. Like if I missed a training session, like the world was coming to an end. Like I was not the best version of me, but I felt like people almost respected what I was doing more because I was in that environment. And since coming out of it and being at a higher body fat percentage and not training as religiously, you almost feel like people kind of disregard it and go, well, you're not in ridiculous shape, you don't know what you're talking about. And it was so refreshing to sit and listen to somebody talk who actually echoed the fact that side of the business is more damaging than good. And I think it's so important. So what I'd love to get into is that whole conversation around what people perceive to be a sign of knowledge and a sign of experience, and ultimately actually the kind of behaviors people should be seeking out, and the kind of information people should be seeking out when they want to improve their overall health and how they look. Because I think that they're two intrinsically different things in terms of what is considered to be what we should look for versus what actually is beneficial long term. So I'd love to get your thoughts from that side of things. I know it's quite a broad subject, so it's one of those exam questions where it's like, here's a statement, discuss.
No, I think there's so many interesting points there, and that's the thing. Like having aesthetic goals isn't inherently wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that just when that comes at the sacrifice of everything else, and it's distinguishing between the adaptive and the maladaptive, and when we lean on these behaviors and the motives they come from, like what are the intentions here? And the perceptive thing you mentioned is quite a fascinating one, because it's all perceptive, isn't it? Body image is perceptive. It's hugely subjective, regardless. Sometimes I find in physique sport as well, the definitive objective measures of health, you can look at someone's blood work and that can be in the decline. Subjectively, we're faced with this cognitive dissonance where we can look at the objective truth, like this physique competitor looks great, but I might have some insight into their health profile, and they're obviously unhealthy, but that is superseded by how we perpetuate things in the media and on social media, and the stories in which we choose to tell people. And there's an inherent dishonesty about it, I think, and that unfortunately is one of the things with like predatory capitalism and how that works in our fitness industry, is that people are easier to sell to when they are vulnerable and feeling insecure about themselves. And if I can sometimes position myself as an authority figure, this is what I have, which you potentially want, I can offer this at, you know, whatever rate it is in terms of monetary value. And that is all how it's always been. And my angle now is more from a place of just encouraging a healthy level of skepticism that these subjects are hugely nuanced, and there comes an element of self-awareness that we need to tap into first, because there are certainly people I can reflect on now that had I had a better psychological understanding of them, perhaps their history, like eating disorders, the propensity for hereditary issues, like, you know, one instance that sticks out in my mind as almost like the key definitive factor why I chose to walk away from aesthetic sport and working with people, was that I'd worked with an individual towards a higher level internationally over 2.5 years, and got her to a point where it was, you know, this is going to be the last one. You know, everything was in decline, noticed visible changes as well as behavioral changes. And then based on what I thought was a thorough screening 2.5 years previously, she went on to tell me, you know, there's a history of eating disorder there in herself, but also in her sister, in her mother. And I thought, just, you know, perhaps if I'd done my due diligence and there was an element of guilt and, you know, experience there, then perhaps I would have never worked with that person. But actually, is there another way in which we can work with people? We can screen them more thoroughly, have a better psychological understanding. And that is really where the exchange and the collaborative effort and the coaching art comes into play, I think. So I'm very honest about what I do and I don't offer. And despite it not necessarily being the most financial viable options myself, because I'm very conscious, as well as a lot of people probably listening to this, is that you have a skill set that could do very well. You know, if you didn't perhaps have the same moral compass that you have, or the inherent values that you have that others seemingly don't seem to consider. And that's a very difficult one in this space in which success is based on monetary wealth or the shape of your body. And there is an ability to do it differently, I think, although less popular. And I think a lot of people now that may see my content or what I speak about, you know, that I'm essentially shitting on how other people are doing things. It's not. I'm speaking to the people, the audience that might want to work with me or work with others that offer a similar thing, or even if they're just to take away and self-reflect a little bit. And is this what I want? Is this actually going to address that deeper rooted need of my self-worth, my self-esteem? Is the answer going to be in that 12-week body transformation? Possibly not, but possibly for some people. Possibly they do just want it as a once-in-a-lifetime thing. And I think it's a great thing to do once for yourself, to something to prove to yourself, so long as you don't base your self-worth and your success and, you know, how you see yourself to the world or how you hope others to see you based on just your physical appearance or seemingly what you present to the world. Because social media is one of those things that has a propensity to set us all up for deception, I think, even to deceive ourselves. And you see people cultivate this persona of themselves that you meet them in real life and they're just not that person. You know, I've seen it affect a lot of people when it's based on almost appeasing their followers when they've built up a large audience, or they've honed a certain identity as the physique person, then they're then held captive to that. They must continue to perpetuate the same message because their business relies on it, but also their psychological safety relies on it. They feel like a better person when they look a certain way, and they receive a certain amount of applause and accolade from certain individuals as well. And there's lots in there, I think, just not in our pursuit of dopamine and seeking validation from others, and potentially bypassing how to validate ourselves and how we truly, based on our values, see a happier, successful existence, not just based on the metrics that other people have kind of cropped up with, which are constantly drummed down our throat by others in the health and fitness space.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I completely agree with everything that you said, and I think there's a lot of similarities between you and I in terms of how we work, because, again, as I said, my initial thoughts when I was getting into coaching, into the industry, was that I was going to help other people compete, because I thought that's what I wanted to do, and I thought that's kind of what you had to do to be considered a good coach, is you needed to get people to step on stage. And as I personally became disillusioned with it and realized that actually it was doing a lot of damage to my own body image, to my relationship with food, and also recognizing a lot of the issues with the industry in general. And I started to move away from it. You do get question marks from people where, I'm putting content out that's not, it's not aimed at those that want to compete. If you want to compete, I'm not your coach. Like, it's as simple as that. And it's not because I can't get you ready for a show. I absolutely can. I'm a sports nutritionist. I can get you ready for a show. I just prefer not to. I prefer to work with the people who perhaps have in the past felt they needed to adopt that kind of method, and it didn't serve them, and they didn't enjoy it, and they weren't able to get to where they wanted to get to. Those are the people that I want to help, that feel stuck, that feel lost, because you turn to social media or the media in general and everything's about either rapid weight loss or stepping on stage, and everything's glamorized. And it's like, yeah, all of these approaches can be beneficial, but they can also be potentially very damaging if it's not the right approach for you. So, and it and it's a difficult one. And again, from your perspective, probably more so where you have prepped people for competition to a very high level, it must be difficult shifting away from that and saying, actually, do you know what, I'm gonna pivot here. This no longer serves me. And I think people respect individuals when, if you said, I'm no longer going to compete myself, it no longer serves me, but I'm going to continue coaching people. I don't think anybody would have had an issue with that. They would have viewed it as a positive retirement from competing. But because you wanted to pivot your message and the way that you help people, it ruffles feathers, and people almost view it as that. Well, you're Dan Osman. You do this. You're selling out. Like, what, are you too good for us now, kind of thing. And I think
I
it's
like to stick you in a box, but
yeah.
essentially to help them make sense of you. And I think people like to categorize, perhaps me, I've been asked in the past, like, am I anti-diet? I'm not anti-diet. It's just like, if you are going to pursue this, these are the things I'd like you to consider, not just, for yourself, but for me also, from a place of responsibility. And again, I'm very conscious some people don't perhaps think as deeply about these things, but I always refer to, we're essentially part of a web of influence for everyone. And when it comes to the constructs around our body image and our relationship with food, and patterns from our childhood, is we have media, which we've always been exposed to. That's obviously amplified with social media. We have the influence of our parents. Some of the things that perhaps they were doing their best at that time. I was very much brought on the, think of the starving children in the world. You must finish it. You must earn dessert and things like this, and good and bad foods. And those are the messages I'm now trying to move away from with my kids. And also, one significant thing I think impacts us all in the health and fitness industry is our peers. So I have a responsibility, I feel, even if others don't, to my peers. So I don't want to perpetuate this lifestyle of solely building my business around aesthetics, although I have the skill set to do that. Based on the people that you're working with, we've got to consider all the nuances within, and that person's predisposition to picking up some of the less helpful behaviors through the pursuit of that. And if you were talking there about if I'd stepped away from physique and competition myself but still chose to prep people for show, like, I'm very conscious of my own body image in that. Is that if that's something I'm trying to move away from, there's an incongruence there, because I'm trying to move away from image-based media, physique updates, scale weight and girth measurements being the sole definitive metric of success with people, and look at the less subjective, look at the more subjective stuff, like how are you feeling about yourself, how's your sleep, how's your mood, how's your general feelings of well-being. And if I was to work with that audience still and claim to be helping to people work with their body image and their relationship with food, there is that incongruence. They don't go hand in hand. You can't claim to better someone's body image and their relationship with food and prep them for a competition, because a lot of the inherent practices that you pick up through competing are distinctly unhealthy. The super rigidity around your food focus all the time, very stringent about every morsel of food that enters your mouth, those constant frequent physique updates. Is if you're again, sorry, just to drum on the point of there being that conflicting message, is if I'm trying to encourage people to work on their health more holistically, and as much as I despise that word because it's been bastardized, but thinking about the mental and the physical aspects, is if I'm solely basing that on scale weight, physique updates, is I'm making the body a focal point.
Yeah.
And working with someone's body image and bettering the relationship with food is moving them to a place of indifference, and not even to a place of, feeling positive about your body all the time, because that's entirely unrealistic. No one feels positive about their body all the time. Everyone has lapses when it comes to their nutrition, but we're trying to move people out of that all or nothing thinking.
Yeah.
By focusing on those metrics of solely aesthetics, body fat, weight loss, etc., that is distinctly bringing the body to the forefront of the mind, and everything else sits outside of that. So I can't claim to be helping people with other deeper rooted aspects if I'm still using before and after pictures and I'm
Yeah.
still solely celebrating weight loss or measurements lost and things like that. And I think there are quite a few that are now moving more into the fringe of our side of the industry, where they do want to help people on a deeper level, but they are still perpetuating the worst aspects of it, and they might not recognize that themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's still that onus where coaches feel that they need to demonstrate their results, and the easiest way to demonstrate it is, graphs that show weight loss or inch loss before and after photos. And don't get me wrong, if my clients want to share their results, I'll pop it on my story and be like, yep, this is fucking awesome. But like you, I don't share before and afters, because a big part of what I do with the people I work with is addressing things like relationships with food, is their relationship with themselves and their perception of progress. And actually it's far more around the nutrition and the mindset side of things than the training aspect, and it's really hard to capture that in a progress photo. I had a great episode which will be coming out in a few weeks with Lewis Potts, where we spoke about this, because he's got a different view, and I completely understand his perception and his view on progress photos. But for me, I always find it's when the biggest change that you make in people is changing their behaviors, their thought processes, their lifestyles. It's really hard to get that in a photo without sort of staging it and saying, right, can you take a photo at the start looking fucking miserable, and then in 6 months time when you're in great shape, we'll get a photo of you smiling, and we can look at the difference. And I know it's a flippant way of looking at it, but that is ultimately the stuff that, in my opinion, that brings the greatest value and the greatest long-term benefit to people's overall health, is the stuff that's hardest to document and hardest to show, because it's all the stuff that's going on in the background. And I completely agree, and I loved what you said in terms of the fact that if you're still promoting body image and aesthetics as a primary aspect of how you help people, you are still ultimately placing yourself in a position of encouraging, to a degree, slightly unhealthy behaviors, because it's the same as when you prioritize weight loss as your primary focus. Well, the likelihood is you're going to adopt more short-term approaches, because it will result in quicker responses. And you've only then got to look at organizations. So, for example, Slimming World, yes, they work with millions of people and they see millions of people lose weight. But if you read the comment sections, anytime anyone does a negative post about Slimming World, there will be tens of thousands of people who document all of the negative impact that have come from doing things like Slimming World. And I think when you fall into that trap of focusing purely on weight centric or aesthetic centric behaviors, it does come at the expense of general health. Whereas when you take that approach, I think Ben Carpenter did a great and so he did a great talk at IFS on it, and I'm going to try and summarize it in basically a sentence and probably bastardize the shit out of it. But when you take a health centric approach to things, you improve all of the different facets of health, and 9 times out of 10 a byproduct of that will be better aesthetics, loss of weight, increase in fitness level, and the stuff that is traditionally considered what you would expect from a PT. And I think it's a shame in a way that the industry is so hell-bent on getting people to look so great for a before and after photo, rather than actually what we should be in my opinion, what we should be here to do, which is help people become healthier, happier, have better relationships with food. Because if you tackle those things, undoubtedly people will end up in better shape.
Yeah, that is the byproduct, totally, and that is their own subjective version of that shape as well. And this isn't a slight on anyone that uses before and after pictures. Everyone has their preferred way of working, and that might be the demographic that they work with. That is absolutely fine. I guess my issue would be the incongruence that's there, and perhaps the people that know better and choose not to do better. And there is this, I have this thing that, if it fits your narrative, I always refer to. as we
Yeah.
all find these justifiable means of explaining why we do things.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I could find 101 different ways why I should use before and after pictures based on, and I have done that in the past, admittedly, I have done that in the past. I think when I was making the transition into not just solely using before and after pictures is, I run numerous very successful 16-week photo shoots, which weren't necessarily just the body being that, but also celebrating the other life factors that people improve, like more attentive dad, or like more switched on, more energized, better feelings of well-being, mood, etc. But I just found that, and this nature of social media, isn't it, and our attention span's diminishing, is that whatever I posted, regardless of the story that I went along with it, it always revert back to what calories are they on, what training program are they on.
Yeah.
And it just, essentially banging my head against a brick wall. And perhaps I could have capitalized on that a little bit more. And I think there is always a justifiable way of saying, oh yeah, I use before and after pictures, but also I tell the story. Yeah, but your audience will go to the shortest route, which is, that is the before, that's the after. I can resonate with those pictures a little bit more. That sparks my interest. And then when they get in there, they'll be bitterly disappointed. It's almost like a misrepresentation. It's almost
Yeah.
mis-selling to a certain degree, because you can claim to help people in their health and longevity. I always think from a professional standpoint as well, I'm looking at career longevity. I've been doing my job in some shape or form for nearly 20 years now. At some point, the physique stuff wanes, or it ends up being, as I kind of refer to it, a self-imposed prison where I've got this pressure to maintain a certain physique, which isn't conducive to my lifestyle. I'm married, I've got 2 children. I'm not willing to make the compromises. Frankly, the sacrifice is necessary to look a certain way now.
Yeah.
For me to perpetuate that image of myself would mean sacrificing the elements of life that do make me truly happy to appease an audience that I could arguably leverage and sell to. But that just doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
And that's just me personally. And again, that's not a slight on anyone else. Everyone else has the right to do whatever they please. It's just, I'm coming from a nuanced and experienced position. And I don't mean that to sound too grandiose, but kind of the shortest way of putting it is, been there, done that, worn the t-shirt. Like, take from that what you will. But I think a lot of people, perhaps in our fringe of the industry, is based on, oh, you're the person that never achieved anything physically, or you've never dieted for a show. That's why you're anti-diet. And again, that's that people's perspective thing that helps them categorize you and stick you into a box. We had that with the body positivity movement. Well, of course, this plus size model is talking about, loving your body every single day. And there's an issue with that messaging as well. It's interesting to me how fast people have moved on from the whole body positivity movement when things like GLP-1s have been introduced, and we've got long-term activists and larger body, I guess, advocates that were telling us to love their bodies that have seemingly forgotten all that, because they now have the ability to do what they've never been able to do quite quickly. And there's some hypocrisy there as well. But there's hypocrisy on both sides. I just try and spark an element of thought amongst people, even if they're not going to work with me. It's at least going to cause some introspection or some thought for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, a really important point, because the way I always view things from my perspective is not everybody is going to work with me. I'm not going to be the right coach for everybody. But if I can pose some questions that help somebody find the right approach for them, whether that's with me or somebody else, then that's, I consider that to be a success in itself as well. Because if I can prevent somebody from adopting a method that is going to do more harm than good, that's job done. That's what I'm here to do, is to help people find the best approach for them. So if by me posing questions about certain avenues and approaches, get somebody just to take a step back and not dive headfirst into the 12-week transformation with the coach that's showing their before and afters without disclosing the cycles of gear that they were running to achieve it, then I consider that to be as much of a win as somebody saying, actually, I want to work with you. Because you're quite right, there's so much hypocrisy in the industry. People will jump on trends to try and stay relevant, and I think it's probably more important than ever for coaches like us, or coaches in general, to to kind of have your approach and hang your hat on it and stick with it, and not fall into this trap of jumping on trends, because otherwise you end up looking like people like Eddie Abu, who will sit there and demonize eating anything other than red meat and eggs because of what it does to your insulin levels, whilst also completely ignoring the fact that when they were winning Mr. Olympia, that they were injecting insulin every day. And it's like you know, if you're forever jumping on the trends to try and stay popular, I think you'll forever be in a be at risk. I wouldn't say you're 100% you will do this, but you'll be forever at risk of doing more harm than good to the people you're trying to help.
And themselves, I think, to a certain
Yeah.
degree. And you know, there's I should say, like, with a out of compassion, I do get that it's rough for fitness professionals, especially in how saturated, not necessarily competitive all the time, but how much is out there. People are overwhelmed with information more than ever. It used to be an issue of information scarcity, and there were a few key figures you'd go to for advice, but there is so much out there, and how do I compete morally, ethically with that? But you can lean into those trends and you can appease the algorithm gods and you can post those half-naked pictures, but you know, how does that leave you feeling? And again, looking at a career longevity point of view, where that all that stuff wanes over time, are you still going to be wanting to work with that population in 10 years? And that might not be something you need to decide now, but it's certainly something you should think about.
Yeah 100%.
Because
100%.
I get the allure. I get the allure to lean on trends and to, you know, consume a lot of what other health and fitness professionals are posting and what is seemingly successful, and ambitions of growing your audience. And if I grow my audience and I impact more people and I can help more people and I can make more money, I get all that. I do. I totally understand all that. And I'm not dismissing anyone's need to make money, because things are harder than ever. But at the same time, you know, how does that leave you feeling professionally and personally when you're working your own shit as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like you said, everything kind of runs its course when you're jumping on the more trend-based approaches. And what do you do when that trend starts to dry up a little bit? You've only got to look at people like Paul Saladino, who obviously rose to fame as a keto carnivore, self-proclaimed king of, put countless books and made a shitload of money off of it. And the minute that market started to get more saturated, it was amazing how many podcasts he started doing where he started talking about the fact that he eats carbohydrates and how important they are. And it's like, okay, so you're a smart chap. You've recognized the fact that your industry you helped to grow is now beginning to become a little bit too saturated. Your message is being lost in the crowd, and you're going to swiftly exit before it gets ugly. And I think that's, again, when you fall into that trap of trying to appease the algorithm, you do.
And what message does that send your audience as well? That this person is willing to believe in nothing.
Yeah.
At the prospect of making a little bit of money, or have they lent on believing in something? You know, and as you say, like drawing a line in the sand almost. Like, this might not be hugely popular amongst my peers, but I'm not playing that game. I'm playing my own game where I can confidently put out my message in the most articulate way possible to communicate with the people I think I can best communicate with. I think that is, for me, that is the only way to do it, because playing all the other games, I'm just not willing to. I've got the time. I've not got the cognitive space to jump on these trends. And I don't like doing a huge amount of filming in my home. That's my home. I think there's a certain amount of digital modesty we all need. Like, certain things are just for me, you know, share everything with the world. What's left for you, you know? And people become so invested in that, documenting every moment of life. Oh, I had a wonderful shit today. Like, you know, there's certain things you just don't need to post about. But if you do, you know, you do you, boo. But I don't want to be living in 5 years. I spend enough time on my phone already. You know, my moments where I could film at home or I could do some content, that's with my kids or with my wife, or, you know, if I do go out for a meal with friends, is I want to let them know they're the focal point of my attention. I want to be present in that. I don't want to have my phone in hand, you know, taking a picture of every single morsel of food that goes into my mouth, a big mountain of pancakes as I'm like waffling them down, telling them about food freedom. There's you know, there's life to be had outside of all this, and they're striking a balance that fits for us. And I'm not proclaiming to have any answers for everyone. I'm just, you know, sharing about what works for me.
Yeah, and I love that. And again, I think it's so important with your entire message is the fact that you are very good at ensuring people realize that, you know, these are your views. You're not saying it's right or wrong. It's your reasons, it's your motivations, it's your drivers. And I think when you keep your own sort of like inner peace and your own morals and ethics at the forefront of what you do, you tend to make more um, positive decisions on things. Again, when you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody, and most of all, you don't please yourself because you're constantly chasing that adulation, and it is hard with social media because you see people's pages blow up overnight from bits of content. And I always use my own journey as an example. My Instagram is sat on 3,000 followers, where it's been for 4 or 5 years of consistent posting. My TikTok is on over 20k, and I've only had it a couple of years, and you kind of go, I don't get it. And then you see other pages that new pages suddenly explode overnight, and you're like, it can be really
All the
hard and
blueprints
disheartening.
all the blueprints are out there on how to grow your social media following. Like, no one, we're all subject to the algorithm gods. No one knows how that works. Some people strike it lucky. I've had a couple of posts that have gone viral a few years ago, just essentially written on notes on my phone that's just blown up. But that's very fleeting, and I get the rush and the dopamine spikes that come with that, but that also attracts the negative aspects as well.
Yeah.
Social media isn't going anywhere. I think, I'm not dismissing social media, but there's a way to learn to live with it well, I think, and that is very individual and unique to us. And I mean, my first IFS, I've done everyone apart from the first one, and I had 3 people. I always use this anecdote because I still think it's quite funny, and I'm not going to say it didn't bother me at all, because at the time it did a little bit. It left me questioning, but I had at least 3 people at the first one I went to in London asked me why I was speaking, because they had 30,000-50,000 followers or whatever, because that again is a definitive measure of how knowledgeable or how impactful or successful someone is like how many followers you've got. I don't think my following has changed much over those years. My quality of life has improved loads, and I'm not saying that you don't need a huge following. I think from a business perspective, perhaps you need a more engaged following. I've always thought of my content as more relatable, whereas I think a lot of that viral stuff, or the people that make an effort to make it viral, it's more transactional. Like, if I put this out, then I'm expecting this certain response, and when I get it, I feel great, and when I don't, I feel crap about myself. I don't want to be reliant on those factors. I don't want social media becoming something that I tie my self-worth to. And that's just me knowing my disposition and how it makes me feel. Some people, they're all about that, and well, my hats go off to them. I hope that makes them happy, but for me, that just doesn't work.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that point of doing things for the right reasons. Ultimately, you've got to, in terms of the messaging you put out, in terms of the way that you work with people, in terms of the clients you want to work with, as much as we want to help people, ultimately we want to help the right people and the people that are right for us, because the only way we can show up authentically for ourselves and for others is if we're actually doing what we want to be doing. And I think when you strip it all back, that's what it comes down to. It's finding the shit that you enjoy and doing it. It's the same message that I put out to my clients who act from an activity perspective. If they're, how often should I train? What should I do? I'm like, find something you fucking enjoy and do it. And do it again and do it again, because when you base everything that you're doing around what you like doing, you enjoy doing it, you look forward to doing it, you do it more. And if you're filling your life with things that you enjoy, you're undoubtedly going to feel happier in the majority of the time. And in a world where it's so easy to look at what everyone else is doing and feel inadequate, filling your time with shit that you enjoy doing is invaluable, in my opinion, whether that's from a training perspective, a food perspective, or just life in general. I think we need to prioritize more of the shit that we enjoy, because if you spend all your time looking at everyone else's highlight reel, you just get stuck in that headspace of, why aren't I good enough, when actually everyone's got the control to create a life they fucking love.
And the ironic thing, I think, the push at imploring people to be authentic is, if you're having to curate a version and force a version of yourself to be this, in air quotations, authentic representation of yourself, that is inherently inauthentic. So it's, there's all this push to be authentic, but if you're showing up for people daily, as that, the phrase likes to go, but you're not showing up for yourself and your loved ones and the people that truly matter in your life, because you're living life essentially trying to document presence instead of actually being present with those around you, that again is, is that leading to the fuller life you'd hope for? Is that
Yeah.
serving a purpose? Like, however people justify that, I think it all comes from that place of self-awareness and that understanding of what leads you feeling happier and more fulfilled, professionally and personally.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. I know I'm guilty of the opposite in terms of I go to gigs or restaurants, or I do go out with mates and stuff, and I take no real photos. I don't do anything. I'm just there enjoying myself, and then I come to think about trying to create some content. I think, oh, it'd be great if I had some, some images I could use to make a carousel, and I don't. I probably don't take enough, but because of that very reason, I don't want to be the person that's like, I always think back to I don't know if you've seen the film The Night Before, the Christmas film that came out a few years ago, and there's a guy that one of the characters in there is like just made it big in the NFL at the age of
Oh, I
like
do. I love
34.
that film. I love that
So
film.
good.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
he's like always on his phone, and he's like fucking everything sponsored by Red Bull and all this kind of stuff. And my friends take the piss out of me a little bit, enough as it is for having 20,000 followers on TikTok, like without me constantly being on my story. And I think I'm it's always just nice to speak to people that have a similar viewpoint. Like we've got enough going on around us to enjoy and to focus on without almost devaluing it by trying to capture the moment for social media.
Yeah, a lot of the things that I think make us most happy and fulfilled are right under our noses.
Mm.
And again, that effort to seek some validation of presence leads us not feeling present in our own lives. And
Yeah.
although we're more connected than ever with social media, I think that it does have the propensity to leave people feeling more disconnected than ever and
Yeah.
lonely. Essentially, they've got all these wonderful things and these people under their noses, everything they could possibly want, because they're no longer recognizing this social media thing. This, even their identity as a coach is a facet of their identity, but it's not wholly their identity. And actually, don't forget the stuff that's under your nose right now. And there's always you can always move those goalposts. There's always the propensity to accumulate more, but
Yeah.
if your life is pretty fulfilled outside of it, do you need more? Like, when is enough? And on a deeper level, I guess the question a lot of people need to ask themselves is, when are you enough? When do you feel enough?
Yeah, 100%, and I love that. And I think it's a really nice place to kind of round things off. I'm sure we'll get you on again, and we'll dig into this in even more detail. But yeah, I think it's been awesome. It's been a really good chat, and
Yeah, thank you for the invite, mate. I've really enjoyed the chat.
anytime. Yeah, like I said, we'll definitely get you back on, because I think there's a lot that we could dig into. But before we disappear, just let everybody know where they can find you again. I'm sure they'll want to go and check you out if they don't already follow after this.
At the.dan.osman on Instagram. I have to say that very slowly. It makes sense. It sounded like a straightforward handle, but actually repeating it out loud isn't the best place. I have a mailing list. I have my own podcast, Dan Osman's Ramblings of a Madman. And you can find everything else from there. But yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Perfect, mate. It's been awesome. And yeah, thanks obviously everybody for listening. Make sure you like, share, and do all that good stuff, and subscribe and stuff. And we'll obviously see you on the next one. But Dan, thanks for coming on, mate. It's been fucking quality.